I never thought my own heartbeat could sound like a confession. But every night when I lay beside Roy listening to the steady rhythm of his breath, I felt my pulse quicken, as if my body was betraying me long before my words ever did. I am Bridget, 34 years old, a wife, a mother, a woman who once believed loyalty was simple until temptation made it complicated. Roy was a soldier long before he was my husband. Even when he left the battlefield, the war never truly left him. He carried silence like a weapon, eyes always scanning mind, always cataloging details no one else noticed. At first I admired it. His discipline felt like safety, a wall built around us keeping the world's chaos at bay. But over the years, that wall became a prison. He rarely spoke about his work, and when he did, it was veiled in phrases that revealed nothing. I began to feel like a visitor in my own marriage, watching a man whose heart was somewhere I could never reach. I tried to fill the emptiness with routine. PTA meetings, grocery lists, dinner on the table at 7. Our son's laughter echoed through the hallways, and for a while that was enough to remind me life still had warmth. But when the nights grew longer and Roy sat staring at classified files, I would stand in the doorway, invisible, yearning for a glance, a touch, some reminder that I was not just an accessory to his mission. He never yelled, never strayed, never forgot anniversaries. His faithfulness should have anchored me. Instead, it suffocated me. Then came Perry, or at least that's the name I knew him by. He entered my world like a gust of air through a locked window. Sharp suits, a smile that lingered too long, eyes that saw me not as a soldier's wife, but as a woman. He asked questions Roy never did. What dreams had I buried? What did I crave when no one was watching? He made me feel alive in ways that were reckless and intoxicating. For the first time in years, someone looked at me as if I were not invisible. It started small. Coffee breaks that stretched longer than they should. Text messages sent in secret, each one a thread tightening around my conscience. Then came the nights I lied to Roy saying I was visiting a friend, while in reality I was tangled in hotel sheets with a man who whispered promises he never intended to keep. Each betrayal was easier than the last until I convinced myself this was not betrayal at all, but liberation. But liberation has a price. Perry was not just a lover, he was a collector of secrets. At first I thought it was curiosity when he asked about Roy's work, about the hours he kept the files. He studied the names he mentioned in passing. I laughed, brushed it off, told him I didn't know much. But he pressed harder, his charm sharpening into insistence. You must have noticed something, he'd say, fingers tracing my arm like his touch could coax out the truth. I wanted to please him, to keep that intoxicating attention, so I shared crumbs. The tiniest details, what Roy ate before late nights, the way he double-checked locks, the phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Each crumb felt harmless until the crumbs formed a trail. The day Roy confronted me, it wasn't with rage. It was with precision. He laid out evidence the way only a man trained to see through lies could. Text messages I thought I'd deleted. Surveillance photos that made my stomach twist. Bank records that traced dinners I had convinced myself were invisible. I wanted him to scream, to throw something, to give me a target for my shame. Instead, his voice was calm. 8 months. 3 days. That's how long it's been. Hearing him count the days of my betrayal broke something inside me. It meant he had known, lived with the knowledge, watched me every morning pour his coffee and kiss his cheek, as if my lips weren't stained with someone else's lies. He let me believe I was hiding when in truth, I was already exposed. When the divorce proceedings began, I tried to brace myself for bitterness, but Roy did not fight with venom. He fought with silence. He let the lawyers speak, let the documents speak, let the weight of my own choices crush me without ever raising his voice. In court, I demanded everything: custody, property, financial security. It was desperation, a frantic attempt to salvage power from the ruins of what I had burned. But Roy came prepared with something I could not have anticipated: a single sheet of paper. The moment he handed it to the judge, the room shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Then the doors burst open and armed officers stormed in. Their eyes were not on Roy, they were on Perry, on the man I thought was my escape. I watched in horror as they dragged him out, shouting words that made my blood run cold. espionage, infiltration, foreign agent. Perry Wexler was not who he said he was. He was Pavel Resnick, a spy who had been using me as his pawn. The betrayal I thought I had chosen was nothing compared to the betrayal I had walked into. I wasn't just an unfaithful wife. I was a liability, a weakness exploited by a man who had never loved me, only used me. Roy's eyes met mine across the courtroom. There was no triumph there, no gloating. Only something colder, disappointment so profound it made victory unnecessary. He hadn't needed to scream or rage. His silence, his patience, his unshakable discipline had been enough to dismantle me. I lost the case. I lost my husband. I lost the man I thought I loved when I realized he had never been real at all. And in the quiet aftermath, when the reporters left and the lawyers packed their briefcases, I sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse, feeling the weight of every choice I had made. People think betrayal is a single act, a sharp break. But it isn't. It's a slow unraveling thread by thread, until one day you look down and realize you are naked before the world stripped of every illusion. That was me. A woman who mistook silence for absence, who mistook attention for love, who mistook danger for freedom. Now I live with the echoes of that silence. And every time I hear the word betrayal, I know it isn't just a story, it's my name. The weeks after the courtroom felt like I was walking through fog. I would wake up in the small apartment I rented after leaving our home, staring at walls that were bare, stripped of photographs, and memories stripped of everything that made me believe I belonged somewhere. My body went through motions, shower coffee, answering emails, but my soul felt absent, as if I had left it behind in that courtroom the moment the judge looked at me with pity instead of justice. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. Friends who once invited me to brunch now avoided eye contact. Parents at my son's school stood a little too far away, their conversations shifting the moment I approached. Betrayal has a smell, I think, and I carried it on me like smoke. The smell of shame is unmistakable and no perfume can mask it. I tried to reach out to Roy once, weeks after the dust had settled. I told myself it was for our son, that he deserved parents who could at least coexist. But if I'm honest, it was selfish. I wanted to hear his voice even if it was cold. I wanted proof that he still saw me, that I hadn't turned into nothing more than a cautionary tale in his eyes. When he finally answered, his voice was steady, professional, as if he were speaking to a colleague. "We'll coordinate schedules through the lawyers. It's better that way." He hung up before I could reply. His silence was sharper than any insult he could have thrown at me. Nights were the hardest. Silence pressed down heavier than any weight, and I filled it with wine, with music played too loudly, with memories I couldn't bury. Sometimes I scrolled through old photos of us, Roy in uniform, his steady hand on my shoulder, his eyes focused on me in ways I had forgotten how to appreciate. I would press my fingers against the glass of the screen as if I could reach through and hold the version of him who still believed in me. But the more I stared, the more I saw the cracks, the moments he had looked at me with suspicion, the way his jaw tightened when my phone buzzed too often, the nights he lingered too long outside the room before entering. He had known all along, and still he stayed silent. That was the cruelest part, realizing his patience had not been ignorance, but strategy. Sometimes I dreamed of Perry, or Pavel, as I now knew his true name. In my dreams, he wasn't the spy, the manipulator. He was still the man who had brushed the hair from my face, whispered promises in the dark, made me feel alive. I would wake up with tears on my pillow, torn between grief for the illusion and disgust for my own blindness. How had I not seen it? How had I let myself be so easily played, so easily discarded once my usefulness expired? The world moved on, but I was trapped in limbo. Roy's career ascended higher. I saw his name in articles, his commendations, his reputation for brilliance in the intelligence field. Our son thrived under his care, and I became the visitor, the weekend parent, the one whose hugs felt shorter, whose words carried less weight. I watched my child's loyalty lean toward his father, and though it shattered me, I couldn't blame him. Roy had been steady where I had faltered. He had been protector where I had been weakness. Once at a school event, I saw Roy across the gymnasium. He stood tall, composed, applauding politely as our son received an award. Parents around him smiled, drawn to his quiet authority. I stayed near the back, clapping softly, pretending not to ache every time our son looked to him first. When our boy glanced at me, his smile was thin, polite, like I was someone he cared for but no longer trusted. In that moment, I realized I had lost not just a husband, but my place in my son's heart. There are nights I replay the courtroom in my head like a film reel. The moment Roy handed over that single sheet of paper, the way the room shifted, the doors bursting open as officers stormed in. The shock on Perry's face, the betrayal mirrored back at me like a cruel joke. I thought I was orchestrating a rebellion against a quiet marriage. Instead, I was just a pawn in a much larger war I never understood. I tell myself I have learned. That betrayal is never freedom, that silence is not absence, that the grass is not greener in the places lit by forbidden fires. But then the loneliness creeps back, and I wonder if I have really changed, or if I am still the same woman, desperate for validation, willing to risk everything for a touch, a glance, a moment of feeling seen. That is the curse of betrayal. It teaches you the cost, but it never erases the craving. Sometimes when I pass a mirror, I don't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes are hollow, her mouth pressed into a line that speaks of regrets too heavy to voice. I want to reach out to comfort her, to promise that redemption is still possible. But then I remember I am that woman, and redemption may be the one thing forever denied to me. And so I live each day carrying the silence Roy left behind, the silence that was sharper than any blade, heavier than any judgment. It is my punishment, my karma, my legacy. I remember sitting alone in that small apartment one evening, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound keeping me company. It was strange how silence could feel like both a punishment and a reminder. A punishment for what I had done, yes, but also a reminder of the silence Roy had wielded so perfectly against me. His silence wasn't absence, it was control, power, discipline. I used to confuse it with indifference. Now I understood it was sharper than any scream. The shame never really left me. It followed me like a shadow everywhere I went. At the grocery store, I would see familiar faces look away too quickly, their eyes betraying recognition and judgment. At church, where I once found community conversations stopped the moment I walked in. Betrayal doesn't just break marriages, it exiles you. You become the person no one wants to be seen with, the cautionary tale mothers whisper to their daughters. I tried to rebuild some form of routine. Work errands, weekends with my son, but even those weekends carried their own wounds. He loved me, yes, but there was a distance now, a hesitation in the way he spoke to me, as if he were guarding a piece of himself I no longer deserved. I'd ask him about school, about friends, about the things that once made him chatter endlessly, and his answers were short-clipped. When he looked at me, I saw Roy in his eyes, the same sharp awareness, the same discipline. It was as if I had birthed a mirror that reminded me daily of the man I had betrayed. There was one Saturday when he asked if he could leave early, said he had homework and needed to get back to his father's. I smiled, said of course, and drove him across town. As he ran up the driveway to Roy's house, I stayed parked at the curb, watching through the windshield as the door opened and Roy greeted him with a steady hand on his shoulder. My son's face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My chest tightened, the air thick with a grief so raw I had to grip the steering wheel to stop myself from sobbing. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just lost a marriage. I had lost my place as a mother. The nights were the worst. I filled them with meaningless distractions, scrolling through feeds, pouring glass after glass of wine, trying to find some noise that would drown out the ache. Sometimes I caught myself drafting messages to Roy, long paragraphs, apologizing, begging for just a shred of conversation. I never sent them. What was the point? He didn't need to answer. His silence said it all. Perry haunted me too. Even after he was dragged out of that courtroom in handcuffs, even after his real name, Pavel Resnick, was plastered across headlines, I couldn't escape the ghost of what I thought we had. I hated him. I hated myself more for missing him. At night, I remembered his smile, his words, the way he made me feel seen. But those memories twisted into knives because I knew they were never real. They were tools, weapons, part of the game he played at my expense. Still, my heart betrayed me mourning a man who never existed. The worst part was how much Roy had known. Every detail I thought I'd hidden, every lie I thought I'd spun, he had already pieced together. He lived with that knowledge for months, waiting, planning, letting me destroy myself while he prepared his move. I used to think revenge was a dramatic outburst, a confrontation, a storm of anger. Roy taught me it could be quiet, surgical, patient. His revenge wasn't just exposing me, it was making sure I had to live every day knowing he didn't even need to shout. I envied him even in my disgrace. His steadiness, his ability to rebuild his reputation untarnished while mine was in ruins. I read articles about him, commendations, awards, quiet respect from people who admired his integrity. He had transformed his silence into strength, while mine only deepened my isolation. Every headline about his success felt like another nail in the coffin of who I used to be, and yet somewhere deep inside I still longed for him. Not for forgiveness, I knew that would never come, but for the comfort of being seen by him again, even if only for a moment. To look into his eyes and find something other than disappointment. To hear his voice without the steel that now lined every word. But I knew better. His silence was final. His revenge complete. My life had become a monument to my own betrayal, and no amount of longing could rewrite the past. There are days when I still wake with the weight of his gaze pressing on me, even though Roy hasn't looked at me in months. It's strange, isn't it? How someone's silence can linger louder than their voice ever did. I used to think I could escape it by leaving the house, by filling my hours with errands or distractions, but everywhere I went, I carried him with me, the memory of his calm, the way he dismantled me without ever raising his voice. I tried to convince myself I deserved a second chance at life. I started applying for jobs again, ones that would remind me I could stand on my own, that I was more than the woman who had been publicly shamed. But interviews became interrogations. Employers had heard whispers, seen the articles about Perry's arrest, about the courtroom scandal. They didn't need details. They just needed the outline: a wife, a spy, a betrayal. And that outline was enough to close doors before I even stepped through them. Bills piled up. The apartment felt smaller each day. Sometimes I wondered if this was Roy's unspoken design too, not just to divorce me, not just to expose Perry, but to let the world itself turn its back on me. He didn't have to ruin me. He simply let me ruin myself, and then he stepped aside so everyone else could see the truth. That's the kind of revenge you don't recover from. The loneliness gnawed at me most when my son wasn't there. His weekends with me grew fewer, his excuses more practiced. Dad and I already planned something he'd say, or I've got a school project. Each time I smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't slice me open, to know that his life no longer needed me at the center. He had chosen stability, safety, the parent who had never failed him. And I couldn't blame him. He deserved better than me. I remember one night in particular. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that rattles windows and seeps into your bones. I sat by the glass watching headlights smear across the wet streets, and for the first time I whispered aloud what I had always known: I lost him. I lost everything. My voice cracked, the sound foreign in the silence I'd grown used to. No one answered, of course. The only reply was the rhythm of rain, steady and unbothered by the collapse of my world. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had confessed to Roy earlier, before the lies piled so high they crushed me. Would he have forgiven me then? Would he have fought for us instead of preparing his quiet war? Or was I always destined to fall, no matter when the truth came out? These are the questions that haunt me, the ones with no answers, the ones that keep me awake long after midnight. Perry's name still surfaced in the news occasionally. Each time it felt like reopening a wound. His trial, his crimes, his network of deception, it all painted me as nothing more than a pawn. And maybe that's all I was. A desperate woman starved for attention, handing over pieces of her husband's life to a man who never saw her as anything but leverage. I hate him for that, but I hate myself more for letting him. I keep thinking about karma. People talk about it like it's some cosmic force that arrives suddenly, striking down those who do wrong. But I've learned it's quieter than that. Karma lives in the little things, empty chairs at dinner tables, the way people look at you without really seeing you, the silence of a phone that never rings. Karma doesn't explode, it erodes, and every day I feel a little more of myself washed away by it. I don't know what the future holds for me. Some days I think I'll find a way to rebuild, to piece together a life from the ashes. Other days I think this is it, that I'll live the rest of my years as the woman who betrayed her husband and was destroyed by his silence. Maybe both are true. Maybe rebuilding doesn't mean erasing the past, but learning to live with its scars. But one thing I know, I will never escape the echo of his silence. It is in every room I enter, every mirror I pass, every night I close my eyes. And maybe that's my true sentence. Not the divorce, not the whispers, not the loneliness. My sentence is remembering the man who once loved me quietly, and realizing too late that his quiet was the loudest love I would ever know. I sometimes catch myself walking past our old house as if the ghost of who I used to be might still linger behind those walls. The curtains are different now, the garden more trimmed, but I swear I can still see the shadows of our life etched into the bricks. I picture Roy at the dining table, papers neatly stacked in front of him, the steady patience in his posture. And I picture myself there too, laughing, distracted, restless, never realizing how fragile it all was, how easily love can crack when you stop tending to it. It hurts most when I remember the small things. The way he always made coffee exactly the way I liked it, with just enough sugar to cut the bitterness. The way he brushed the hair from my forehead when I was half asleep on the couch. The way he said my name when he wanted me to know he was listening, even if he didn't speak much. I used to dismiss those gestures as routine background noise in the rhythm of marriage. Now they haunt me. They remind me that I had love, real love, and I threw it away for something that was never real. People sometimes ask me quietly why I did it. Why betray a man who never betrayed me? And I don't have an answer that makes sense. I could say I was lonely, that I was starving for attention, that I wanted to feel alive again. But those are excuses, not reasons. The truth is simpler and harder to admit. I was foolish. Foolish enough to mistake a spark for a flame, foolish enough to trade something solid for something that was always destined to collapse. The silence of my apartment is deafening. I've learned to live with it, but it still presses on me like a weight I can't shake. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like if Roy were still here. Would he sit across from me, quiet as ever, sipping his coffee? Would our son be at the table laughing about something at school? It's a picture that feels so close I can almost reach out and touch it, yet so far it may as well belong to another lifetime. And then I remember the last time Roy and I locked eyes in the courtroom after the officers dragged Perry away. His expression wasn't anger or triumph. It was something colder, deeper, disappointment. That look carved itself into me deeper than any wound. It told me everything words never could, that I had not just betrayed him, I had betrayed the best parts of myself. I wonder if he ever thinks of me now. When he's working, when he's with our son, when he's alone in the quiet, I used to resent. Does he ever remember the good times? Or am I forever crystallized in his memory, as the woman who broke his trust I'll never know, because his silence is impenetrable? And perhaps that's his final act of revenge, to leave me wondering always with no closure, no answers. I try to hold on to what I've learned, though. The lessons are bitter. I know now that silence is not absence, it can be presence in its sharpest form. I know that attention is not always love, that charm can be poison, that betrayal destroys. More than trust, it destroys the betrayer too. And I know that once you lose someone's faith, no amount of tears or apologies can buy it back. Sometimes I dream of starting over, of leaving this city and building a new life somewhere no one knows my name. But no matter where I go, I carry the weight of my choices. Betrayal is not bound by geography. It lives inside you, a scar you can't cut away. And so I stay. I wake up each morning, I go through the motions, I see my son when I can. I watch Roy from afar when our paths cross at school events. And each night when I lay my head on the pillow, I listen to the silence. It is the same silence that once protected me, once suffocated me, and now punishes me. This is my life now. This is my penance. And though the world may forget my story someday, I never will. Because the greatest revenge my husband ever gave me was not exposure, not humiliation, not even divorce. It was survival. He thrived without me. And I am left here alone with my silence to remember every day what I destroyed. Please, if you've stayed with me through my confession, let it mean something. Learn from my mistakes. Don't confuse silence for emptiness. Don't mistake distraction for love. And never trade what is real for what is fleeting. Because once it's gone, it may never come back. If this story has touched you, I ask you to support this channel. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe for more stories told with raw honesty, and leave a comment with your own reflections. Sometimes the only way we survive our mistakes is by facing them together.